April 7, 1943. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. First Lieutenant James Swett crept into the tight cockpit of his Grumman F4F Wildcat, Bureau number 11084. He ran through his pre-flight checklist with hands that would not tremble, despite what his mind was saying. This was it. His first combat mission as division leader for Marine Fighting Squadron 221. The morning patrol was routine, just empty Pacific sky and the endless blue horizon. Now, as he and his 3 wingmen came to a stop on Henderson Field's coral runway for refueling, the radio erupted with urgent messages that changed everything. 150 Japanese aircraft inbound. Iron Bottom Sound. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. Swett's crew chief was still refueling his Wildcat when the scramble order arrived. Gas cans were tossed aside, hoses uncoupled, and 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 Twin Wasp engines thundered to life across Henderson's dispersal area. The entire Cactus Air Force was launching, every flyable fighter, every pilot, hurling themselves at the approaching wave before it could get to the naval vessels anchored at Tulagi Harbor, 30 miles north. But Swett's division would get there first. 4 American fighters against the biggest Japanese air raid attempted in months. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. The F4F4 Wildcat that Swett strapped into that morning was never built to be pretty. At 28 feet, 9 inches long, with a wingspan of 38 feet, it appeared stubby and aggressive, a flying bulldog with an attitude problem. Its big twin Wasp radial engine generated 1,200 horsepower at takeoff, turning a 3-blade Hamilton Standard propeller that gripped the humid tropical air. 6 Browning M2. 50 caliber machine guns were set in the wings, 3 per side, carrying a total of 1,500 rounds. Each gun was synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, projecting a cone of destruction 300 yards in front of the aircraft. Top speed at altitude, 318 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 34,000 feet. Combat radius, about 300 miles, with careful fuel management. The Wildcat was outclassed by its Japanese opponent, the Mitsubishi A6M-0, in nearly every measurable category. The Zero was faster by 13 miles per hour, climbed better, turned tighter, and had greater range, but the Wildcat had 3 crucial advantages that kept Marine pilots alive. Tough construction, with armor plating behind the pilot and around the engine, self-sealing fuel tanks that wouldn't explode when struck, and those 6 heavy machine guns that could rip apart the lightweight Zero with one burst. American pilots had learned to survive by not fighting the Zero's fight. Never turn with them, never try to climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight in the dive, use your guns up close. Get in, take the shot, get out. Swett had trained for this. Sort of. He joined the Naval Reserve in August 1941 as a seaman, 2nd class, began flight training in September, and graduated in early 1942 in the top 10% of his class. He'd earned his private pilot's license before the war at the College of San Mateo, logging 450 hours of civilian flying, much more than most cadets got in Navy training. When given the choice between a commission in the Navy or Marine Corps, he'd pick the Marines. Why? Because Marines fought from carriers and island airstrips in the Pacific, and the Pacific was where this war would be won or lost. He'd gotten to Henderson Field in February 1943, assigned to VMF 221. For 2 months he'd flown patrols, seen empty ocean, and wondered if he'd ever truly encounter the enemy. Now, climbing through 10,000 feet over Iron Bottom Sound, with his 3-man division fighting to keep formation, he was about to learn if training and talent were enough when the shooting started. At 15,000 feet, Swett saw them. A formation of Japanese Aichi D-3A dive bombers, codenamed VAL by Allied intelligence, coming from the north in a loose gaggle that spread across miles of sky. The VAL was a fixed landing gear, single-engine dive bomber, slower than the Wildcat, but equipped with defensive machine guns in the rear cockpit. Each carried a 550-pound bomb intended for the American ships anchored in Tulagi Harbor. Somewhere above and behind this bomber formation, Japanese Zero fighters lurked as escorts, ready to pounce on any American fighters that tried to interfere. Swett didn't see them yet, but he knew they were there, waiting, watching. Radio chatter flooded his headset, other Marine divisions calling out contacts, altitudes, headings. The sky over the Solomons was about to become the most dangerous piece of airspace in the Pacific, and First Lieutenant James Swett, on his first combat mission, was diving into the middle of it. "Division, follow me down." He rolled inverted, pulled the stick back, and aimed his Wildcat's blunt nose at 3 VLs, starting their dive toward the harbor. The airspeed indicator rose quickly, 200 miles per hour, 250, 300, 320. The Wildcat shuddered as it accelerated, its airframe groaning under the strain of the high-speed dive. At this speed, nothing in the Japanese inventory could touch him. He armed his guns, flipped the master switch, and centered the first valve in his reflector gun sight. Range, 400 yards, 350, 300. He squeezed the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns exploded with a sound like ripping canvas, magnified 1,000 times. The Wildcat shook as 3,000 rounds per minute flowed toward the Japanese bomber. Tracers, every 5th round loaded with phosphorus, curved through the air in brilliant orange trajectories. The VAL's tail section came apart, pieces of aluminium skin ripped away. The bomber nosed over, trailing smoke and flame, and dropped toward the jungle canopy, 20,000 feet below. Swett's first combat victory took exactly 2 seconds. He pulled out of his dive, climbed, and at once lined up a second VAL. This bomber's rear gunner opened fire. Swett could see the muzzle flashes from the 7.7mm Type 92 machine gun. Bullets snapped past his canopy, close enough to hear over the engine roar. He ignored them, held his aim steady, and fired another burst. The second valve exploded in midair, changed instantly from aircraft to debris field. No parachute. 2 victories in under 30 seconds. The third VAL in the initial group took evasive action, diving hard for the deck as its gunner poured fire at Swett's Wildcat. He closed to point-blank range less than 200 yards and fired again. More hits. The bomber's engine caught fire, smoke streaming from the cowling. Swett was so focused on the target that he failed to notice the new threat until something struck his left wing with the sharp sound of metal punching through metal. American anti-aircraft fire. The nervous gunners on the ships below, seeing Japanese bombers diving toward them, had opened fire on everything in the sky. A 5-inch shell from a destroyer's gun went through Swett's left wing, punching a jagged hole the size of a dinner plate through the aluminium structure. The Wildcat lurched violently to the right. Swett fought the controls, checked his instruments, and made a split-second choice. The wing was damaged, but the aircraft was still flying. He could go back to Henderson, or he could keep fighting. He kept fighting. Banking away from the anti-aircraft fire zone, Swett climbed back to altitude and saw what he later described as a whole bunch of dive bombers trying to get together, scattered all over the sky. The Japanese formation had broken up into chaos. Individual bombers were looking for friendly aircraft, trying to regroup into defensive formations. They were vulnerable, exposed. Perfect targets for a Marine pilot with ammunition left and blood in the water. Swett attacked the scattered valves using tactics he'd practiced, but never used in combat. He positioned his Wildcat below and behind the enemy bombers, where their dorsal-mounted defensive guns couldn't lower far enough to track him. Then he would pull the nose up, lead the target, and fire short, precise bursts, 2 seconds maximum to save ammunition. The 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds would punch through the valve's unarmored belly, shred control cables, rupture fuel tanks, and neutralize the bomber before its crew could react. The 4th valve fell, trailing flame. The 5th disintegrated under concentrated fire. The 6th spun out of control, its pilot slumped in the cockpit. The 7th tried to escape, diving toward cloud cover, but Swett followed and shot it apart at close range. 7 Japanese bombers neutralized in under 15 minutes. He was officially an ace, 5 aerial victories on his first combat mission. The record books would never see another accomplishment quite like it. But he wasn't finished. As the 7th bomber fell, Swett saw one more Val attempting to reach Tulagi Harbor. He had ammunition remaining, not much, but enough for one more engagement. He lined up behind the bomber, closed to within 100 yards, and opened fire with all he had left. The Japanese rear gunner returned fire desperately, bullets stitching across Swett's canopy and fuselage. The windscreen shattered, spraying plexiglass fragments into Swett's face. Oil from a damaged line sprayed across what was left of the windscreen, coating everything in thick black fluid. He could barely see. He kept firing. The Val's engine exploded. The bomber pitched nose down and vanished into clouds. American ground forces later found the crashed aircraft with its dead crew still inside. But the wreckage was never officially confirmed as Swett's victory. The Marine Corps credited him with 7 destroyed. Swett claimed 8. The debate would go on for the rest of his life, a friendly argument between a pilot who knew what he'd achieved and a bureaucracy that required proof. As the 8th Japanese bomber vanished below, Lieutenant Swett's engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The battle damage from the rear gunner's final desperate shots had cut his oil cooler lines. Without oil circulation, the big Pratt and Whitney radial engine seized completely, turning his Wildcat from fighter aircraft to very expensive glider. He was 20 miles from Henderson Field, losing altitude fast, with a shattered canopy, oil-obscured vision, and facial wounds bleeding freely from flying glass. The smart play was to bail out at once, but his parachute straps had been shot up during the final engagement, and when he tried to open the damaged canopy to escape, the mechanism jammed. The 20mm shell that had damaged his left wing earlier had also exploded in the canopy track, welding the whole assembly into immobility. He was trapped in a dead aircraft at 15,000 feet, with no engine and no way out. So he did what any 22-year-old Marine fighter pilot would do. He aimed for Tulagi Harbor and readied for a water landing. The hydraulics were gone, so he couldn't lower the flaps. The windscreen was coated in engine oil, so he couldn't see forward. He had to crane his neck out the side of the shattered canopy, judge his altitude and airspeed by feel, and hope he didn't stall before hitting the water. At 200 feet, he leveled the wings. At 100 feet, he pulled the nose up slightly. At 50 feet, he knew he was coming in too fast. The Wildcat hit the water at roughly 90 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. Swett's loose shoulder harness, damaged during combat, let his body slam forward into the instrument panel with bone-crushing force. His nose shattered. Blood filled his mouth. The aircraft bounced once, hit the water a second time, and at once began sinking. Water poured through the shattered canopy as the Wildcat's weight pulled it beneath the surface. Swett fought with the seatbelt release, finally freed himself, and tried to swim toward daylight. His parachute harness, torn but still partially attached, caught on the canopy frame and dragged him down with the sinking fighter. 20 feet underwater, lungs burning, vision narrowing from blood loss and oxygen deprivation. This was how it ended. Not shot down by enemy fighters, but drowned in a sinking aircraft after the most successful first combat mission in Marine Corps history. The irony would have been funny if he weren't dying. Then his life raft deployed. The CO2 cartridge, designed to inflate automatically when exposed to water pressure, triggered at roughly 20 feet of depth. The raft exploded into full inflation and rocketed toward the surface with enough buoyancy to rip Swett free from the wreckage. He shot upward through green water, broke the surface gasping, and gulped air that tasted like blood and seawater and victory. A Coast Guard boat collected him 20 minutes later. They pulled a bleeding, oil-soaked, half-drowned Marine pilot out of Tulagi Harbor and at once administered morphine for the pain and scotch for the shock. By any reasonable medical assessment, Lieutenant Swett should have been evacuated immediately for treatment. Instead, after they stopped the bleeding and set his broken nose, He asked when he could return to duty. While recovering in the Naval Hospital, Swett learned that Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Fleet Air, Solomon Islands, had nominated him for the Medal of Honor. The citation would read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as a division leader in Marine Fighting Squadron 221 in action against enemy Japanese aerial forces in the Solomon Islands area, April 7, 1943. In a daring flight to intercept a wave of 150 Japanese planes, First Lieutenant Swett unhesitatingly hurled his 4-plane division into action against a formation of 15 enemy bombers and, during his dive, personally exploded 3 hostile planes in midair with accurate and deadly fire. Although separated from his division while clearing the heavy concentration of anti-aircraft fire, he boldly attacked 6 enemy bombers, engaged the first 4 in turn, and, unaided, shot them down in flames. The medal was America's highest military decoration. Swett was 22 years old and had been in combat for exactly 15 minutes. But the war wasn't done with him. After his brief hospital stay, Swett returned to VMF 221, which was switching from the F4F Wildcat to the new Vought F4U Corsair, a bigger, faster, more powerful fighter that represented the next generation of American naval aviation. On June 30th, 1943, now promoted to captain, Swett covered the Rendova landings and added 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty medium bombers to his score, plus shared credit for downing a 0. 11 days later, near New Georgia Island, he shot down 2 more Bettys and another 0 while shielding his wingman from attack. Then a second 0 that Swett had unseen opened fire from his blind spot and shot him down. Again, he ditched in the ocean, again. This time, indigenous tribal members in a canoe rescued him and transported him via 10-man canoe for several hours to an Australian coast watcher's hidden observation post. A Navy PBY Catalina flying boat eventually returned him to the islands where VMF 221 was based. In October, over Kahili, Bougainville, a major Japanese air base, Swett added 1 confirmed 0 and 1 probable, though he lost his wingman in the engagement. In November, he destroyed 2 more VALs and possibly a Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony fighter. By December, having flown dozens of combat missions and accumulated 15.5 confirmed victories, Swett was ordered back to the United States. He left Guadalcanal on a Dutch motor ship on December 11th and arrived in San Francisco on New Year's Eve. After less than 24 hours stateside, he shipped to San Diego, where he was given 30 days leave and married his longtime sweetheart, Lois Anderson. The combat veteran and the girl from San Mateo began their marriage during a brief respite from a war that still raged across the Pacific. A year later, Swett returned to combat, this time flying from the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill during operations at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. He survived the war with 15.5 confirmed victories, 2 distinguished flying crosses, 2 Purple Hearts, 4 air medals, and the Medal of Honor, presented by President Franklin Roosevelt. In a 2003 interview for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, Swett reflected on that first mission over Guadalcanal. "I was headed away from the anti-aircraft when I found a whole bunch of dive bombers trying to get together. They were scattered all over the sky. I flew below them so their tail gunners couldn't shoot me. Then I would aim the plane's nose up and let off short bursts to take them out. The last one fought back hard. Shot up my cockpit, wounded me, damaged my engine. But I got him before my engine quit." Asked what he was thinking during those desperate minutes, Swett's answer was characteristically understated. "I was thinking I better not waste ammunition. I was thinking I better not get shot down before I run out of targets. Mostly I was just doing my job." The mathematics of James Swett's first combat mission defy understanding. 7 enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed, possibly 8, in 15 minutes of continuous air combat, wounded by enemy fire and friendly anti-aircraft, engine destroyed, aircraft sunk, near drowning in the wreckage, and survival against odds that would have eliminated anyone with less skill, less courage, or less sheer stubborn determination to complete the mission, regardless of cost. Other pilots became aces in a day during World War II. Other aces received the Medal of Honor for extraordinary valor. But James Swett might be the only pilot in American military history to gain both distinctions on his very first combat mission. The F4F Wildcat he flew that day rests on the bottom of Tulagi Harbor, 300 feet down, covered in decades of coral growth and marine organisms. The aircraft that carried a 22-year-old Marine into aerial combat and brought him barely back alive is now an artificial reef, home to fish and memories. But the story it represents stays preserved in official records, combat reports, and the Medal of Honor citation that hangs in the National Museum of the Marine Corps. It's a story about what happens when training, talent, and desperate circumstances collide at 300 miles per hour over hostile territory. It's about the kind of courage that doesn't calculate odds or consider consequences, but simply does what must be done because no one else is in position to do it. 7 Japanese bombers never reached their targets that April morning. 7 American ships that would have been hit were spared. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of American sailors survived because one Marine pilot, on his first combat mission, decided that damaged aircraft, enemy fire, and overwhelming odds were merely problems to be solved, not reasons to quit. Freedom is not free, Swett said decades later, wearing the Medal of Honor at a veterans ceremony. You've got to fight for it in order to keep it. We wear this medal basically for the veterans of all wars, for all services, particularly those who haven't returned. Lieutenant James Swett returned. But on April 7, 1943, over Guadalcanal's blood-stained waters, 7 Japanese air crews did not. And the young Marine pilot, who made sure they wouldn't threaten another American ship, became, in 15 minutes of violence and valor, one of the legends of American military aviation. They sent him on his first combat mission against 150 enemy aircraft. So he shot down 7 of them, survived getting shot down himself, nearly drowned in a sinking fighter, and came back asking when he could fly again. That's not just becoming an ace in a day, that's becoming a Marine. And that's the end of today's story. If James Swett's courage inspired you, a lone pilot facing impossible odds, be sure to subscribe for more true stories of courage from World War II. Hit the like button and tell us in the comments which untold hero deserves their spotlight next. The war may have ended, but their stories still fly.